gentleman, a scholar, and a Bogan.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, so there's a Bogan in the library. So today I just thought I'd talk a little bit about what is a Bogan, a little bit about what I specifically do when it comes to my research. Look at Bogans as an identity and a community. Just briefly go over some of the other projects that I'm involved in, and then kind of sum it up with who really cares and why do I even bother doing this stuff. Which is probably the most important question. So first, what is a Bogan? Well, it's not a hillbilly or a redneck necessarily. A lot of people when I talk about Bogan try and think of alternative words, particularly if they're from another country, because Bogan is a particularly Australasian term. So they come up with words like trailer trash in America, chav in England or some of the areas of the UK, and then the New Zealand Bogan is very different from the Aussie Bogan. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So when I'm talking about Bogan, I'm talking about someone who self-identifies as a working class heavy metal fan, or has an affinity for working class culture, who tends to dress in black band t-shirt, jeans, and steel cap boots or worn out sneakers. But recognizing that labels are really complicated and not everyone fits with anything else, so that's why I tend to throw in self-identifies, because if you're a Bogan and you know it, then you're welcome. It's very different from the Australian Bogan. The Australian Bogan, they tend to use the term in a lot more derogatory sense, and it's not usually tied to music. So we frequently in New Zealand talk about Bogan, we're talking about heavy metal and hard rock music, whereas Australians it's more about lower socioeconomic groups. And while stories of where the actual term comes from kind of varies, there is a Bogan River in New South Wales. I've always kind of thought that it's something to do with that region. But yeah, in New Zealand we tend to talk about it in relation to a particular type of music. So I did a doctoral thesis, which is why I can legitimately say Dr. Dave. And it was entitled The Everyday Bogan's Identity and Community Amongst Heavy Metal Fans. So a lot of the stuff that I do is about using this group, or heavy metal in general, to sort of talk about a variety of different issues. So I got a scholarship to do it. It's kind of ironic that someone from the scholarships office is here, not wanting to single her out. But so I wasn't necessarily, with my thesis, I wasn't necessarily spending the scholarship money to try and find out what a Bogan is, just to reassure everyone. That sort of came into it, but it was a lot more about how people form identities, how they share that identity with other people, how they come together as a group, and how they express that in very physical ways. And I just found Bogans a particularly useful group to work with because I am a Bogan, so it was all really familiar. And Bogans are quite, how should I put it, physical in how we express who we are. So when I say physical, I'm talking about we're always wearing the t-shirts, we go out to concerts, there's all these different things. When we inhabit a place, you know we're inhabiting a place, to put it politely. We stick posters up on the wall, we listen to music and all that sort of thing. And that's something that a lot of people do, like that's common across a lot of groups. But Bogans were particularly visual and a really clear example of that, so that's why I tended to use them in these instances. And so I got a scholarship. Paul Hutchison, National MP, or as I like to call him, Hutchie, was in opposition at the time, said, oh look, this is an example of Labour wasting all this money. And so I got to, excuse my language, piss off the National Party, which ticked off my bucket list. But because of Paul Hutchison's sort of moral outrage about it, I got quite a bit of media attention about it, and because of that I had people actually coming to me wanting to be involved in what I do, which is pretty rare for a researcher. Normally you're hunting down participants and begging people to be involved, and I had the opposite problem. I had all these people who want to be informed about what I do and want to be involved, and that's fantastic. So I owe them a drink. So I won't bore you with the methodology stuff, but what I do I call an autoethnography. So autoethnography is where, well, my definition is that you're part of the group that you're studying. So I'm a Bogan that studies Bogans, hence the auto part of the word. And then ethnography is a range of different methods that are put into context through direct observation. So I did, for my thesis, I did interviews, I hung out with people, so that's a direct observation. I asked them to bring along objects that were meaningful for them that we could talk about. So we talked about band t-shirts, concerts they'd been to, all those sorts of things. And then, yeah, as I said, I just hung out with them. I went to these different concerts, and so that put the interviews into a certain context and was able to help inform what I was doing. Or to highlight pictures, so to put it another way, that's my methodology. I use this picture in just about every single talk I give because it just sums everything up. So theoretically speaking, when we're talking about identity or a Bogan identity, we're talking about expressing things through art, so a particular form of music, so heavy metal music. We're talking about practices or things people do. So we're talking about going to concerts, we're talking about moshing and crowd surfing. I'll talk about those a bit more later on. And there are places that we move through. So what I was interested in is not only how Bogans react to each other when they're hanging out in a group, self-contained kind of group, but also how they experience things as they move through different places. Because who we are and the different aspects of who we are tend to change depending on the environment that we're in. So I'm a Bogan here talking about Bogan, so I made sure I had black jeans, I made sure I had a band t-shirt, but at work I wear a collared shirt and a name tag, so that's a different way of expressing who I am through what I wear and the objects that I have. And the music is a way to interact with other people, so I was interested in how people form their own interpretation, their own identity as Bogans, and then how they use that to interact with other people, and so it's that whole like minds or birds of a feather or those sorts of things. So it's, hey, you're into this music as well, hey, we have the same shirt, hey, we're probably similar kind of people, let's hang out and be friends and form a group together. And it's a community of interest, so it's a group of people who come together in these various places with a shared taste in something, with common ways of doing things and way of dressing. And that also implies that there's a wrong way to do things as well. If we're talking about there's a right way, so if you turn up in a pink shirt to a Bogan conference, you may not be as part of the group. So that's kind of the downside of being part of a community as well. Not only is it all great that you're sharing all these common interests, and that also means that there are expectations around how you might do things. And I like the term community. There are lots of other terms out there. Subculture, they talk about Bogans or heavy metal music as something that only young people are into. I've even heard the, well, I think rather ridiculous tribe, like neo tribe. I have to be honest, anytime I hear the word neo or postmodern, or I zone out and stare out the window. But academics really like those kinds of terms because they can just make stuff up. They feel like they've got a new theory. But these were all terms that I didn't really like. I didn't like subculture because that seems to imply that it's something less than a culture because of that sub prefix on there. I didn't like the idea that it was only something that young people are into and that you grow out of it, because I'm 34, I've been listening to it since I was 12. I don't think I'm going to, yeah, I wouldn't say I've grown up yet, but it's not something that I grow out of. And there's a lot of other people who are older than me who are still Bogans and still into heavy metal music and things like that. And yet some of the literature seems to view this as a phase that you grow out of. And I think a lot of that comes out of viewing heavy metal as some form of resistance. Like, I don't really buy into that at all. Yeah. So I tend to like the term community, because community is about people coming together in a group and enjoying whatever they're doing. So, I realise I'm racing through things, but I had a lot of cool things come out of my thesis, and I thought I'd sort of talk about some of those things. So this was one of my participants. Oh, that was the other thing. I got my participants to choose whatever name they wanted to kind of, for their confidentiality and stuff like that. So I got some really funny like one guy decided to call himself Batman in my thesis, and then that got changed to something else equally as silly. But this is someone who called herself Miss Raven, and I'm talking about how objects represent who we are. So we were talking about this particular photo. She's the one on the right, photo of her when she was 14. And she chose this photo because there were so many different objects in this photo that kind of represented who she is at that particular time. So she talks about, yeah, this was my whole drinking time, the first time I started drinking and going to parties and stuff. We were listening to Rage, Metallica, Pink Floyd, Pantera, Sepultura, all that. And everyone had the t-shirts and we all drank Lion Red. Check shirts, long hair, Doc Marten boots. This is the stuff that we grew up on and it really sticks with you. Black t-shirt, tie-dyed velvet, Lion Red, yeah, hard, 14. So she's basically given a big list of all the different objects that represent who she is and how she connects with being into this music and being a Bogan. So she's talking about things like t-shirts, she's talking about particular hairstyle, the long hair, she's talking about the Doc Marten boots. So not only are these all things that we kind of associate with being a Bogan, but these are also all things that represent her at that particular time as well. And I always find it interesting how music, we can feel nostalgic about a certain song. So there are certain songs that will trigger, oh yeah, I remember I was listening to this when I was at this particular place, or yeah, this reminds me of this really cool party, or whatever. So we associate these times in our lives and these events with these specific types of music, and those experiences can be relived simply by turning on the stereo and listening to that song again. So it's really, and I mean, she even mentions a brand of beer. Like she even talks about Lion Red, reminds her of a particular instance in her life and things like that. So tattooing is another big part of heavy metal and Bogan culture. And these three photos here are all from a mate of mine, Chopper, who we call Chopper anyway. So what happened was he starts talking about his tattoos when I interviewed him. And he has a lot of tattoos, but these three are all on one arm. And he basically takes me on a tour of his tattoos, and my supervisor and I wrote this article about Chopper's tattoos called Chopper's Tattoo Tour. And he has a story about every single segment of his arm. So he said he starts off, like when he first was getting into heavy metal, he got into this band called Pantera, and he was just learning how to play bass, and he really admired sort of the guitar playing of one of the Pantera members, who's called Dimebag. And he really liked this guy, or he sort of looked up to him, sort of inspired him to get into a band and stuff like that. And then the guitar player was shot and killed on stage. And this happened just when Chopper was starting to really get into this band. So it hit him pretty hard. Had a lot of people in the metal pretty hard. So he decided to get this tattoo of this guy on his arm. So he did. And then he thought, oh well, I might add to this. So he added a whole lot of lightning bolts around the top. And there's a type of guitar that Dimebag endorsed, it's called the Dime Bolt. Then this got extended a little bit further. So he has that there is the logo for Pantera, the Cowboys from Hell logo. Then next there was, after Dimebag died, there was a piece of music that was written by another band to commemorate his memory. So Chopper had the bass line of that song tattooed on his arm. And then he's also, you can't see it in any of these photos, but he's also got some of the lyrics of the song as well. And then some people kind of waving at Dimebag on the bottom. Then this got extended even further. So this is Zach Wild, who's from another band called Black Label Society, who actually wrote this song. So Chopper got him tattooed on lower down on his arm. Then he actually met the guy, so he got the guy to sign his arm, and then he got that signature tattooed on his arm. Then this got extended again. So this guy here is Vinnie Paul, who's another member of Pantera and is also Dimebag's brother. So he got his image tattooed on his arm, met him, got him to sign his arm, and then had that tattooed on his arm. So this is all on his right arm, all down, his entire arm is all dedicated to this one band. So I find this really interesting because when we're talking about expressing who we are physically and how we appear and how we dress and all these sorts of things, tattooing is almost like quite an extreme form of that, because for all intents and purposes, although you can get tattoos removed, this is a reasonably permanent kind of expression of identity. And so this, while not being Chopper's intention, gives him quite a bit of status within the community. That he has these tattoos, he's sort of shown that he's that dedicated to this band and to heavy metal music and to that aspect of his identity, that other people admire him for these tattoos. And again, that's not why Chopper got them, but it's a benefit that sometimes he doesn't have to pay for drinks. And in the thesis, he actually tells me a story of how they went to this bar and these guys were talking about the band. I think they had a t-shirt honouring Dimebag's death, and then his mate sort of says, oh, you know, show him your tattoos, and then he brings up his arm, and then these guys are buying him drinks for the rest of the night. And it was interesting, and this is why, like, the method of my research of actually going out and hanging out with these people puts a lot of the stuff into context, because we were at a bar at a gig, there were different bands playing, and these three guys here are from, or I think were from a band called Harvest, who were playing on that night. And we met these guys and we're talking, and oh yeah, your band's going to play and stuff like that, and then sort of talking about what sort of music are you into and where you're going to play. And they started talking about how this band, Pantera, meant so much to them, and they had a couple of covers, and that's what inspired them to get into music. And then Chopper's got this big heavy jacket on, and he kind of nudges me and he goes, oh, should I show them? So, oh, up to you, man. So he takes off his jacket and pulls up his sleeve, and then there's this entire sleeve dedicated to this one band. And these three guys go, wow, that's awesome, and then pull up their sleeves, and they've all got the Pantera logo on their arms as well. So I'm in the middle of this Pantera convention where they're all talking about this band and what it means to them. And so this is how when I'm talking about physical things and bringing people together and how they connect through this music, this is one of those ways that it happens. So Chopper's developed his own identity and his own relationship to the band. For personal reasons, he's decided, well, you know, for my own benefit, I'm going to tattoo these things on me. Then he goes out. These guys have all individually done the same thing. They have a similar connection to the band. They've all decided to get it tattooed as well. And then that brings them together, and now they have this connection through that band and through this shared symbolism. So I find that really fascinating, this whole idea of how these physical things can be represented. And I've got a couple of tattoos, but they're only tiny little ones. And then afterwards I went into the bar, and Chopper just happened to be there and said, oh, I heard you got a couple of tattoos. And then he goes, oh, you know, you're even more one of us now. You know, sort of he's joking, but to a certain extent it kind of rings true that you're showing that dedication and stuff like that. So for one of my next projects, I might even try and convince the documentary people to let me do it, but I'd love to put a GoPro camera on my head and go into a mosh pit. That's what I really want to do. I'm quite tempted. So this is a photo of the band was called Juggernaut. This is a bar that used to be in Hamilton, 6 foot under. And this is a picture of sort of the mosh pit, and then you can probably see someone's shoes, like they're being carried over the back, crowd surfing. And so this is another physical way of representing identity. So what I'm really interested in is a lot of the literature you read about crowds and stuff like that and how they interact. It's all about, oh, people get into a group, they kind of lose their sense of self, and then they do all this harmful stuff. So you hear things like football hooligans and things like that. They're all normal, nice people, and then they get together in a group, and then it's all because of the group that they do all these bad things. But what I would argue is that a lot of these groups are more reaffirming who we are rather than losing a sense of identity. We're kind of getting an even stronger sense of identity. So I'm in there not only enjoying the music, but I'm feeling more connected to people in some ways literally as you're bouncing off them. you're actually reaffirming that community, and it's much like the example of Chopper's tattoos. This is another physical way of interacting with other people, and then everything's really aggressive and all the rest of it, and then the music stops, and then you're all smiles and patting each other on the back and stuff like that. So I really like, my supervisor actually came up with the phrase that heavy metal and Boganism is all about appropriating violence without condoning it, which I find quite amusing. So it's all about using all this aggressive symbolism, all these kind of aggressive practices and behaviours and things we do, but really we're nice, normal people like everyone else. But this is something I'm interested in looking at more around that, how these big groups and how this reaffirms identity. And I mean, I write a lot about mosh pits, but it's one thing to write about it and another thing to actually be in the middle of it. So that's why, I would love to put a GoPro camera on my head and go running in there. And it's really interesting. One of the cool things about these kinds of physical symbols and these sort of practices is that it translates across different languages and cultures really well. So I went to a conference in Portugal, and I swear this was by accident, but I found out Metallica were playing in Portugal. Thought, wow, this is cool. So the whole time in between the conference, I'm searching down, trying to find these tickets, because even though I've seen Metallica before, for some reason it would be even more awesome to see them in another country. I don't really know why, because they're still speaking English, but... so I found this ticket vendor, and I was like, oh cool, bought the ticket, don't really understand any of it because I don't speak Portuguese, didn't really understand any of the language on it, but there's Metallica, there's another metal band, Machine Head, and then there were a couple others. I thought, oh, that's cool. But it starts at 4 PM. Well, that seems really early, but okay, in another country, go with what they do. So after the conference finished, I sort of trying to find where this is, and you can just follow the black shirts. Like, that's what I really like. So that's how it translates across. So I just found this massive, almost like a pilgrimage up, it was literally like a pilgrimage up a hill. All these people dressed in black shirts, so I just followed them up there, went through the security check. Turned out I was at Rock in Rio, which is this massive rock festival that goes for several days, like big day out, only much, much bigger. Found out the bands didn't actually play until 8 o'clock because of all these other activities that you're doing, rides and stuff. So I just sat up the front, and there was actually a dude with a keg of beer on his back, walking around selling plastic, these glasses full of beer. So the guy just kept going.